There we go. As we go through, before you do the top of page 25 and we fill this piece out, we need to kind of look at the actual characteristics that we have for perfect competition and for pure monopoly. The rationale is because when we're done with this, when we build this up, I'm going to ask you, monopolistic competition is a combination of these different ones. So it's beneficial for you to be able to know what are these characteristics, what are these characteristics, because when we actually talk about monopolistic competition, we're going to take some from each side. Right? So let's just build this up. And I'm just going to call on a few folks. And actually, I'll do with you what I did with second period. I didn't do this with first period, and it went better second period. So I want you to take a moment to see if you know, before I start calling people, what the characteristics are in perfect competition for this, and also the characteristics of a monopoly. So if you don't know that off the top of your head, you can go back to page one of your entire packet, and that's where we did that. And when you look at characteristics of a monopoly would have been on page 10. 10. So take a moment to go back. If you aren't quite sure of those characteristics, go back and do a quick review. I'll give you 1 minute. Nothing. No, it's going to be a combination. It's going to be either this or a price maker. So does that make sense? Yeah. All right, here we go. That may not have been a minute, but it seems like a long time just kind of sitting here and waiting. All right, here we go. Julian, number of sellers, perfect competition. Number of sellers, how many? Is there one? Are there thousands? Many? Okay, so for perfect competition, oligopoly has a few. So when we first started this, right? So there's a whole bunch, right? And here we talked about there being thousands of these sellers. They're exactly the same size, selling. Well, I don't want to get vague with the other answer. So that's one. Arnish, how many for a monopoly? One. Mono, right? It's monopoly. So that's one. Type of product, Lillian. What type of product does perfect competition have? Okay, they're all the same, which is we call that standardized. And what's the other term for that? Okay, there you go, homogeneous. Right? Homogeneous, homogeneous, however you say that. Type of product, right? Type of product. Avery, this is just what you were looking at with that one question. What type of product does Monopoly have? Okay, it's unique, and it's often sometimes called differentiated. So I'm going to underline that. I'm going to underline this as well. Sometimes it's differentiated. This is the one where I said I like to call it unique because there's only one product like that in the world because a monopoly has it. But some other economists may look at it and call it differentiated because it's different than anything else. So either one is fine, but it's either unique or differentiated. Price-making power, Rayon, price-making power for perfect competition?
They're a price taker.
They're a price taker. Bryson, price-making power for monopoly?
Price maker.
They're a maker, right? So price taker, price maker. Entry into or entry from an industry. Ava, how about for perfect competition?
Free entry.
They're free entry, and so what does that say about barriers to entry? Okay, barriers to entry. Ms. Auerbach, how about barriers to entry? If you have free entry, do we have low or high barriers to entry? Okay, really low. So this is low barriers to entry. All right, so and now over for the monopoly side, entry or exit from an industry. Entry or exit from an industry. Yazid, how about that one for monopoly? Okay, really high barriers to entry. Okay, so what your goal is to have, I'm going to give about 30 seconds to decide this. Tavern 4 and 5 is the example that we're going to use in class today. Tavern 4 and 5 is a monopolistically competitive firm. Right, so is Kowalski's, so is Great Clips, so is the Sanctuary Salon that's right down the street, so is that pizza place, so is the Cold Stone Creamery. most businesses that we have in Eden Prairie are monopolistically competitive. But let's just use Tavern 4 and 5. What I want to know is which one of these you have to choose one of these, one of these, one of these, and one of these. Right? So you have to choose 4 of them. And so which ones fit the Tavern 4 and 5 and that industry? Okay, so which ones fit Tavern 4 and 5? Take 30 seconds, figure it out at your table, and then I'll ask you some questions. That's why I love many next to thousands. It's a perfect competition was thousands of firms. Sometimes they call it many competitions. We have a whole yeah, well, when we get, yeah, either I'll ask you to do that or else I'll jump over and do. I appreciate that.
What's the tip for Tavern? And so that means that 3 products that Hammer and Tavern 4 and 5 sells is exactly the same as what they sell. Brick and mortar. Okay, differentiate. Because it's not like the Tavern 4 and 5 burger is there's only one of a kind, right? It's simple. Okay, all right. How about price maker? Price maker, very good. How about beer distribution?
Is it low or is it related to the restaurant? Okay, all right. Okay, here we go. All right, between these two, Lizzie, what did you guys come up with for number of sellers? Okay, many. Type of Avi, type of product? Differentiated. Harnish, price making power?
Maker.
Price making power, max, entry?
Low.
Okay, low. All right, so these are the characteristics that you have for a monopolistically competitive firm. So we have two from a monopoly side and 2 from perfect competition. Someone asked me a few days ago, why is monopolistic competition called that? Because it is a combination of a monopoly characteristics and perfect competition characteristics. So that's why it's monopolistic competition. So once you have identified these, what I'm going to do is take a few minutes and talk about what do you know now about monopolistic competition because you know these characteristics. So because you know these, you will actually learn and be like, oh yeah, because of this, I know this already about them. If you have products that are really differentiated, what it's going to mean for you is you typically will have a higher ATC. Because so much money has to go into advertising. Right? So much money has to go into advertising. And so that ends up being that in monopolistic competition, typically the ATC, in comparison to a monopoly, will be higher. Because a monopoly doesn't really have to put as much money into fending off competition and also setting itself apart from people. Because a monopoly, there's only one. Right? So there's a little bit of difference around that. So that's one of the different things that we can see from here. Ryan, because you have a price maker, what do you know now about a monopolistic competitive firm because they're a price maker?
Demand is down sloping.
The demand curve is downward sloping. So you know right now a little bit about that piece. Okay, so if we know we have a downward sloping demand curve, what I want to know here now is what about the price effects? Question mark. Does Tavern 4 and 5 have the price effects? Right. So what I'd like you to do is at your tables figure out who the oldest person is, and once you figure that out, I want you to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So figure out who is the oldest person at your table. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down based on does Tavern 5 have the price effects? Okay, so you have to discuss and come up with the answer yourself. So Victor, hopefully you won't disagree with yourself. Okay, 10 seconds. All right, you ready? Who's the oldest? Yeah, okay, all right, ready? Here we go. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Who's the oldest? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Okay. We got, yep. Okay, good. All right, nice, good. So price effect, get rid of the question mark. Yes, it does have the price effect. Now, the next question is so what? If Tavern 4 and 5 has the price effect, what do you know now about the business or about the industry if it has the price effect?
Marginal revenue is less.
Okay, you know that because any firm that has the price effect, it means that your demand is more than your marginal revenue when you have the price effect. And so now you know how to graph a monopolistically competitive firm. It will look like that. Now you may look at this like if I walked in and I was a little bit late to class and Rayon was up here and she was going to start teaching the class and she drew this and I walked in and she says, "Hey, Mr. Anderson, is this monopoly, oligopoly, or monopolistic competition?" I'd say, yes. It's all of them. And so what I want you to see is the fact that it is, what I want you to see first is all of them have a downward sloping demand curve and they have an MR that's less than it. And so when you graph these, you typically, you don't graph them really differently here just on one graph, but I will show you a little bit in a few minutes here how the actual elasticity of the demand is different amongst them. So we'll get that in a second. All right, free entry and free exit. Alethea, what does it tell me if you have a firm that has free with really low barriers to entry and free exit? What do you know about long run profits? Because you have really low barriers. Okay, so it's so low that there's none, right? Exactly. So there is zero long run profits. And we're going to kind of revisit that about what the rationale is for that as we do this activity in a few minutes. But what I want to highlight for you is when you look at this, the rationale is when you have no barriers to entry. When you have no barriers to entry, there's nothing stopping firms coming in and taking your profit. So any industry that has low barriers to entry will have zero long-run profit. Perfect competition and monopolistic competition. The others, monopoly and oligopolies, have higher barriers to entry. That's why they have long-run profits. So again, we're taking concepts and then attaching them and applying them to the 4 different market structures. I'm going to pause. Just because I knew a sneeze was coming and I wanted to make sure all the attention was there. Questions? Clarifications? Or about what? So now you know a bunch of stuff about monopolistic competition before we even really dive in because you've had that knowledge from the past almost 3 weeks. This is what we've been building up to. What I like about this day is this almost ends up being kind of like a review day for the final. Because we're basically talking about characteristics and output and profit maximizing, which is going to be on that final. And now we're basically having you refer back and think about that and just apply it to this example here. All right, so here's the question that I'll have for you also. I want you to think about this. This question about what's the relationship between elasticity of demand and the number of firms in an industry. Right, number of firms in an industry. So I will give you 2 examples. Perfect competition has thousands of firms. And the demand for the firm is perfectly elastic. Monopoly has 1. And the demand was fairly inelastic. Okay, so now that you have that, on the bottom right portion of your notes packet, just add in an X and Y axis. Axes, is that plural? Okay, add in the X and Y axes. And what I'd like you to do first is just do a fairly inelastic demand curve and just put an M by it and call that monopoly. And so we said at the very end, and I'll give you, I'll add this in here. This is the demand for perfect competition. Oligopoly and monopolistic competition are going to be different than these 2. But using these 2, this has 1 firm, this has thousands. Anyone care to guess, or you want to share with the rest of us? What is the relationship between elasticity of demand and number of firms? Mr. Reed?
More firms, more elastic.
More firms, more elastic. So, if that's the case, more firms, more elastic, if that's the case, what does in comparison to a demand, what would the demand curve look like for an oligopoly? What would the demand curve look like for an oligopoly in comparison to a monopoly? It'd be between them. It'd be less inelastic than this. So just add in another demand curve, put an O by it, and I want you to see it's more elastic or less inelastic. And again, this is trying to connect elasticity of demand and the number of firms. And I don't know if you want to put a title on that. Elasticity of demand and number of firms. All right, I got your notes? And so if that's the case, now let's take that to the next level and let's figure out, well, what does it look like for monopolistic competition then? Right? So monopolistic competition, Asrita, how many firms does monopolistic competition have? Monopolistic competition, not monopoly. Monopoly has one. Many, right? So, and the reason why I want you to connect with many is because Tavern 4 and 5 is in the restaurant industry. We don't have like 1,000 competitors of Tavern 4 and 5 around our area, correct? Now, across the country, there are thousands of restaurants. But if we just look at around here, we probably don't have thousands. So we have many. So what would that tell you is true about the elasticity of the demand for monopolistic competition in comparison to these two? Is it more inelastic or is it more elastic? Elastic. And so here's our demand for monopolistic competition. And what I want you to connect is that I want you to connect with the fact that you have, and I think Ryan said this, the more firms means more elastic demand. Right? More firms means a more elastic demand. This activity is meant to help you be able to theoretically understand what the demand curve looks like for these. So when you get a multiple choice question that's comparison and contrast, and it talks about which one of these three, monopolistic, oligopoly, or monopoly, which one has the more elastic demand, that you connect the fact that, oh, more firms means more elastic. Because you won't, like I did before, if I just draw this, this doesn't mean you have to draw monopolistic competition like this. If you did, and if you walked in and it said, Mr. Anderson, is this monopoly or monopolistic competition? I'd say, it could be either. So you can graph those things in so many different ways. You will not be asked. You will not be given 3 graphs side by side and say, well, I guess you could get side by side. Like if I did this and if I did this, well, you could tell the difference. Which one's monopoly, which one's monopolistic competition? You would hopefully say that's monopolistic competition. Right? But you typically are not going to, you won't be asked to graph that yourself and show that difference. This is more theoretically. Right? Questions on the elasticity piece? As I look to gain the connection. All right, here we go. On the whiteboards, as I get this arranged, what I'd like you to do is this is going to be this is like a 2 or 3 step process for this activity. So what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you illustrate a monopolistically competitive firm. Let me just erase these so you can start over. And I would like you to show me the I want you to identify price. It's a profit maximizing. Identify price and quantity. Identify price and quantity, and then shade profit and deadweight loss. Okay, for monopolistic competition. All right, that's what I'm looking for first. Then I'll ask you some follow-up. Then just hang tight where you are. I'll give you a thumbs up or thumbs down. Give you some feedback, and then we'll go to the next step. All right, good. There you go. I'll pause the video. Start it up again.